Welcome to another Modern Mind Ancient Book where we're going back to move forward. We're finding a love for the law, the prophets, and the writings. We're thankful that you're here with us. If you are listening, please like, subscribe, share, tell your friends about us. We'd really appreciate it if you'd get us out there.
Tell your enemies about us.
Yeah,
we don't care.
That's right, spiritual warfare. We want the world writ large to become aware that the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Bible itself is a work that's worth your time. My name is Roger. I'll be your host. If you'd like to reach out to us, please feel free. modernmindancientbook@gmail.com. We've got Pete with us today. Pete, how are you?
Shalom. Feeling good.
Feeling good. And we are going to talk about the Book of Kings today.
Okay.
So, the Book of Kings it's an interesting book because you would think that it would be recorded earlier than when it actually comes out, but it makes sense why it was recorded later. So the Book of Kings, it gets compiled or at least completed around 560 BC, but it records from 971.
Yeah.
So
it's actually a history as opposed to a actual reporting of.
Yeah, it has a very real purpose, which we'll talk about shortly. Israel was, big into scribal work at this point in their history, having spent 70 years. Well, at this point, it was the very beginning of their exile in Babylon. But the tradition of scribal work was something that was already in Israel's history, because there were books obviously written prior, or scrolls. But at this point in history, it's going to become very, very important to them. And so the Book of Kings,
it's how they kept their identity.
Yeah, and this tells the story of kind of the heights to the fall, right? And so that's what this book is about, essentially. It had a purpose. And its purpose was to remind the people that you once were a great nation, and here's what happened. So the Hebrew title is Melachim, which is taken from the first line of the text. The Hebrew Bible maintains the two books as one. It's one book. It's not First and Second Kings, which, when we get into some of the later works in, like, say, the Brit Hadashah, the new covenant, the New Testament, we're going to find out that there are separate letters and that kind of thing.
It just was too big to carry around in one scroll.
Yeah,
so they had to break it down.
Yeah, and oddly, the Melachim, or the Kings books, this in the Hebrew Bible is actually recorded as third and fourth. Because the first two books were, let's say, Samuel. So, Samuel was, we have it as two separate books. It was one scroll, and that was First Kings, I guess. And then the second one here is the First and Second Kings. So it was third and fourth, or it would have been third and fourth. When we found the scrolls, we found four separate scrolls. 1, 2, 3,
in the volumes, in other words.
Exactly. So, yeah, it's kind of cool, and it's neat that the Septuagint and the Hebrew both have the same title, Melachim, Kings, in English as well. So that's what the word means. Good stuff. So authorship, it doesn't really tell us who the author was. Jewish tradition, contained in the Babylonian Talmud, suggests that Jeremiah was the author. So while he was in exile, he was compiling documents, and one of these documents was also Kings.
But it would have been common practice at that time for the scribe not to put his name on it, an official document.
Especially a history document like this. This is one of those ones where its purpose isn't to be necessarily prophetic as much as a reminder, as a history lesson of sorts. So we know that there was a tradition of the prophets keeping written records. So that's that scribal past, right?
Yes.
So the prophets are given prominence in this particular set of books, which would further argue for a prophetic influence in the authorship, because obviously this was finalized after the southern 2 tribes had been taken into captivity, because the northern 10 tribes were conquered by Assyria, and then the southern 2 tribes, or Judah, they were conquered by Babylon a little bit later. And so during that whole time, and we've seen this throughout what we've been teaching up until this point, that there were prophets who said, repent, or you'll be taken into captivity, you'll lose everything. And so this very much has that same flavor. It's that sort of book. The recipients of this book would have been the Israelites living during the transition from the united to the divided kingdom. Meaning this existed in a non-finalized form before it was actually finalized. So this is kind of a running manuscript. So the first recipients were really during Solomon's reign-ish.
Yeah, starting right around that time anyway.
Yeah, and so...
Right after David.
Yeah, right after David. So, and it spans 971 to 722 BC. Which is, 200 years after it's finalized, right? Which also speaks to how these books come into being. So, scholars, by and large, will attribute source documents to a completed, what we call a biblical book. Meaning there were documents that had existed over a period of time that were eventually combined into what we call, in this case, 1st and 2nd Kings. Yep, and for some Christians that may seem offensive. I mean, does it ring offensive to you at all?
Not at all. Because we gotta remember, it's a history of it.
Yeah, and for these people, it is a real history, and these are actually royal documents. So these would have been kept in the temple among the ruling class, and they would have been maintained and recorded by the ruling class. The prophets, the majority of these prophets were indeed prophets to the king or in the king's court. And scribes and that sort of thing are expensive. Recording, they didn't have printing presses.
No.
Didn't happen until the Wittenberg.
You couldn't run down to Office Depot and get a ream of paper.
That's right, yeah. And it was, it's a painstaking process to produce papyrus manuscript.
Couldn't type 120 words a minute.
That's right, yeah. It was, if you messed it up, that's an issue. So
didn't have autocorrect.
Yeah, pen and quill and ink, right? So, I find that interesting. It's a good anchor for us into what is real. Because just because, so it's never been offensive to me that these books are compiled documents. Because they existed in a real world at a time with people. And they record things that happened and are recorded according to the imaginations of real people.
Anything that's recorded is biased by whoever wrote it.
Yeah, the belief systems themselves show, right? So, I would...
The culture affects what the
outcome is, what you believe the outcome is. Yeah. And so, I actually very much appreciate that. I love that these books are anchored in reality. Whether you're religious or not.
Real-time people and real-time events.
Yeah, and that's, we have to settle into that and accept that as a fact. It is a fact.
Probably more factual than the evening news.
At this point, maybe. Right? I mean, and these people, they weren't exactly... It's an unusual form of history at that, because it doesn't record positive only. In fact, it records a whole bunch of negative.
More negative than positive as a general rule.
Well, I mean, when you get taken into captivity because you've sinned for long enough that takes place. I mean, they in these books they lost their entire kingdom to not practicing rightly their religion and honoring God, and so God brought first the Assyrians and then the Babylonians. And so for me, these books, I love that they're anchored in history, that they were real people, but I also love that you get a sense of the world view through the eyes of the authors and those who experience it, the intended recipients. Because, so, in our world, we tend to think of things as natural and supernatural. These books do not record a worldview like that. Right? They record a worldview where the natural is very much influenced by the reality that God is there. So there's no supernatural.
Really, that divide's only been in the last 200 to 300 years.
That's right. And we like to call it science, right? So we like to call it science. But science is really just a method of uncovering repeatable events. Or by assuming it should be and then testing that. Right? And so, when we do textual criticism, that's a science.
Oh yeah.
It's a philosophy and a way of examining texts to determine what is real content. Right? And so, science is used by religious people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The thing is
both good and bad.
Right. And the thing is so what's real? As a person that believes Jesus rose from the dead, I know he did.
Yeah.
Something so astonishing happened in the first century that it actually conquered Rome.
Oh yeah.
And a good portion of the world today. I want to uncover and understand these minds, the minds that are recorded in the books of Kings, because it helps me to understand from where I came. What beliefs did they have? What practices did they have? How did they see daily activities? How did the king see his duties? How did the prophets see their duties? How did the average person live out their faith?
How did everybody interact and mesh together?
But without without making the distinction that there's a supernatural. Right? To them, that was God's land. Israel was God's land. It's owned by God. He is present in that place. The temple was God's holy abode. That's where the spirit, the kavod, the
Shekinah glory.
Yes, all of these supernatural explanations as we call them today. But for them, that was every day.
Oh yeah.
God was there.
Yeah.
And they offered sacrifice. In fact, their daily lives were more soaked in religious activities that require real world actions, like offering sacrifices and things, than ours are, and competing worldviews of the nations around them that eventually led to their downfall. So that I think is one of the key takeaways to the books of Kings, is to carefully read it and then uncover what it is that these people, how they lived their lives, and what divisions they really saw. Because I think for the modern mind, we might go, oh my gosh, that's kind of hard for me to imagine that I have to believe God is present in all things at all times, and that when things happen, it was a divine sign or but that's very present in their worldview. And so it's it's just something that we have to wrestle with, right? So these first recipients, it would have been early, kind of Middle Kingdom Jewish people, and they would have had some form of these documents. So the reign of David, First and Second Samuel.
And they weren't far enough removed from the reign of David and the quote glory days of Israel that they still were people alive who had seen that.
I mean, my bet is Solomon was the first kind of recorder of this, because he had the heights of Israel.
Right.
And it would make sense that the king's, his library would want to record, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st Kings, 2nd Kings, because it brought them, 1st Kings probably. They probably didn't have 2nd Kings.
No, probably not. Yeah.
So that it would be a remembrance of, Samuel choosing Saul, and then Saul failing, and David eventually being placed in the position.
It was his family history.
Exactly.
Basically.
Yeah. It's a record of the family becoming the rulers of the land. Right. So, yeah, great insights on that. If you consider that while reading it, I think it really sheds a lot of light on the books themselves, and helps bring it more alive. Right. So, those first recipients, but they didn't have the final form. The final form of 1st and 2nd Kings would have been given to the nation in exile hundreds of years later.
Oh, yeah.
Since it closes with historical accounts of 3 Babylonian deportations. Right. This time in history was a period of transition, not only for Israel nationally, but the Middle East abroad. I mean, Assyria had fallen, Babylon had taken power, and I mean these are movements of seismic proportions.
Oh yeah, world changing.
Yeah, world changing, and the fact is, there's different customs, practices, beliefs, gods, everything.
Oh yeah.
So during the Solomonic reign, Israel ruled militarily. He had chariots and horses and armies and all
large armies.
All the things he shouldn't have done.
Yeah.
He was told not to. And socially and economically, they were doing very, very well. Solomon had established his military presence throughout the trade routes, resulting in control of international business. Right. So that's how they became so prosperous. Right. Because they were in the middle of many nations that were trading goods. Right. Israel to this day is in the middle of many nations. And that, both good and bad, right? Now, this prosperity, though, led to civil war and national apostasy. Yes. Whew. The northern, and it was just after Solomon. Now, this happened in 722. Okay, so just after Solomon, the tribes split. Right. The northern and the southern kingdom. Now, the apostasy of the northern kingdom, and those, 1st and 2nd Kings record some stuff.
Oh, yeah.
In 722, the Assyrians came.
Right.
Now, the Assyrians did really ruthless stuff to the northern 10 tribes. And it wasn't collective. It wasn't collected. It wasn't well planned out. When Assyria exiled people, they exiled you to different places. Right. They would even split up family groups. Right. And they would send you to the farthest reaches. Right. They didn't want anybody settling among anybody who could be allies. Right. So they would just put you all over. Right. The northern 10 tribes really got it bad when they fell. And then the Babylonians in 605, 686. Right. And this was punishment for sin. Right. In both cases. And the book records it that way. Oh, yeah. So,
tells the truth.
That's right. Sin before the fall comes pride. And Solomon. So this is hard for me because I want to think really highly of Solomon, and I want to honor him as an amazing man. Right. But at the same time, he was a man. Right. And he made a lot of mistakes. Right. And so that's also another one of these lessons because. If I were a Jewish man, and I'm certainly grafted into a kingdom where I worship the King of the Jews. I mean, he's my king, right? I'm same people, right? But I wouldn't really want to look on my ancient leadership, my forefathers, the way that the book records it, right? And that's what makes these books so good. Because they don't record the good only.
They record the whole history.
The whole history. Yeah, it's very honest.
They show the skeletons in the closet.
They certainly do. Yeah, the key is in the door and it's wide open. So that's it's interesting, because it also creates a fair amount of misconceptions, right? So people will attack the Bible and they'll say, "Well, look at what happened."
Right.
And then you go, "Well, wait a minute."
Yeah. How could a loving God do that to His people?
Yeah, that's a common thing, right? But it's really just a cursory understanding of what these texts are actually doing, because the text isn't for condemnation. It's for the new covenant. Right. It's to a bigger thing. Right. Instead, it says, no, man, you're not very good at this. Right. In all reality, your fallen state, right? So from the very beginning, from Genesis, has carried through. Right. And when you attempt to rule and reign, because the king was never meant to be anybody but God. Right. Right? But instead they took a king. Right. And this is the end result. Just as Samuel told them.
He told them right at the start, if you get king, this is what's going to happen to you.
That's right. And so, theologians, we've got an idea. We say it's prescriptive. Right. Right? So what did God tell you to do? Right. And then what actually happened. Right? So did you do it? No. Right?
And this is the result.
Yeah, and that's the descriptive part. So, to me, when somebody says to me, the Bible condones slavery, right? I go, wow, I wish I could help you understand it better, right? Because it doesn't. No. What it does is it has a description of what men were doing, and how Israel was supposed to then engage in that, which is more fair than their neighbors. Right. But God created man and woman to be free. Yes. To go forth and multiply. Right. He didn't create men and women to enslave anybody. No. So people did that. Right. The descriptive part is what people ended up doing. Right. The prescriptive part is go forth and multiply. Right. And so it's these macro and micro themes, like these big themes, and then they just trickle down all the way through the thing. And if you actually follow the story, then you realize it is not that God is giving the ability to, let's take for instance a hard law, right? Where if a husband supposes that his daughter or that his wife has committed adultery, he's to bring her to the tabernacle, and she's to drink water mixed with the mud and nastiness of the floor of the temple or of the tabernacle at that point, which you could rightly say is probably full of rotting flesh and blood, and it's not good.
Not something you'd want to eat.
You don't want to drink that.
You don't want to drink that.
Right? But so that's an interesting one to me, because what do you do with that? Right? How do you treat that? It takes a little bit of skill. There is an actually very good explanation for it, and it's not that God told them to do this because jealousy should kill their wife. It's actually really different, and I'm not going to share it with you today. We're going to do that when we get there. But the misunderstanding is that God is not fair and he's abusive to women, which no. If we understand these texts, we know that that's a descriptive thing. You could say it's prescriptive because it's a law, but it's a description of how God gave these people the responsibility to go further than most would ever go just for jealousy, right? So it kind of puts it to bed. And there's other things, but it's actually a fairly long conversation. So, descriptive, prescriptive. These books describe Israel's terrible, the great and the terrible, which is great. It's wonderful. I really enjoy it.
It's reality.
Yeah, it's reality. So the nation had, spiritually collapsed, right? They worshiping with the Canaanites, whom they were told to totally obliterate, right? Didn't work out. The judgment of the Lord had sent Assyria, and then he had sent, Babylon. The prophets came, they told them, So don't do these things,
Right.
Now, the argument of 1 Kings is that Israel's degeneration and judgment into exile because of its idolatrous kings and apostate people. What is idolatrous?
Idolatrous is worshiping anything before God.
Yeah, just
putting anything ahead of Him. Good, bad, or indifferent.
Something that's not God.
Right.
Idolatry. What is apostate?
Apostate is just giving up on God, basically.
Yeah, practicing other
going
things.
against Him.
It's like practicing other things He didn't tell you to.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a lot of statements in here. I always want to get into the details, and I have to remember we're not there yet.
Right.
So, but yeah, apostate is like adding things in that you just
or taking things away.
Taking things, you just stop doing it, right? And
like nowadays, people want to pick out of the Bible what they want to believe.
That's right. Yeah,
that's the same.
I've been to churches where men and women couldn't swim together because a man had to take his shirt off or whatever.
Right.
And so that's just, it's not in the Bible.
Right.
I mean, you can have fun.
Yeah.
Solomon is a key figure in that. Eat, drink, and be merry, all with it to the glory of God within the confines of the law. Right. So, yeah, apostate's an interesting one because it requires you to evaluate doctrine, and fighting over theology can get very challenging.
Yeah. And very nasty.
And very nasty. And that, that's something that Israel proved over and over again, and the church has indeed proved even worse. Right. Our history is not good.
Right. That's why we got 7,000 plus denominations.
It's just ridiculous. Yeah. So the purpose is to show the exiled and chastened, so the people who are horribly removed, right? They've been chastened. That just means like spanked.
Right.
People that the success or failure of the kingdom depends on obedience.
Right.
That it depends on obedience of the king, who is the representative of the people.
Right.
And that's what the people took. Right. When they didn't accept God as king, they made a man king. Right. And the man led them to this place. Right. So that is the descriptive part. The prescriptive part is let God run your life. Let God rule your country. And it just didn't work. Not for them. They chose otherwise.
They chose the fallen nature over the divine.
Yep, and then became a slave to the law.
Yeah.
And the law judged them. And that's what happens.
Right.
Right? So the key verse in this is 1 Kings 6:12 through 13. Concerning this house which you are building, if you will walk in my statutes and execute my ordinances and keep all of my commandments by walking in them, then I will carry out my word with you, which I spoke to David your father, and I will dwell among the sons of Israel, and I will not forsake my people Israel. I will dwell among the sons of Israel. What does that bring to mind for you?
The tabernacle, the temple, whatever you want to call it.
The Garden of Eden.
Garden of Eden.
It's God with us.
Right.
Emmanuel.
And that's what He wants.
Yeah, that's what He wants. So the major theme of the Bible in general is exactly that. Right. Restoration of Eden. Right. Where God is with His people. Right. And so, that's what
spoiler alert, that's how the entire Bible ends.
That's how it goes. Yeah, I mean, and it's again, it's the continuity and the reality of it too. It's just there. It's all the way through the books. So
if there had to be one main theme, that's it right there. Yeah. One main motif.
It colors everything.
Right.
Right. And so now 2 Kings spans the period of the reign of Ahaziah to the release of King Jehoiakim in Babylon. So 853 to 560. The nation was a divided monarchy and transitions to a puppet monarchy.
Right.
So when these bigger nations came through, Assyria and Babylon, they put people in power. Right? And not in good ways.
No.
And because of that compromise comes a fall, right? The people just lose their way. So the book begins with Israel and Judah in civil war. Excuse me. Begins with Judah and Israel in civil war and concludes with the nation in exile. So the 2 Kings was definitely compiled later, right? First Kings maybe started with Solomon, you know, and then this was compiled later, and this just reeks of Jeremiah. Really, it does. Jeremiah was the guy going through town and telling everybody for a long period of time that this was going to take place, right? And so, you know, him recording this just makes a lot of sense, and the desire is actually really good on his part, because he is recording this for future generations, not only for Jewish people but for us. And that's why studying these is so very important. You have to go back to learn these things, and then once you learn it, you can take it forward and understand, kind of, again, you know, going back to the beginning of the podcast, what did the people believe and how did it end the way it ended, right? What was the slip? Where was the slip? What did it look like, right? Because I think if we diligently studied those things, we could look out in the world and go, oh my gosh, I see it so much, right? I know I do. I see it everywhere.
As Solomon said, nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, because people keep doing the same things, right? You know, the king failed because he wasn't a good representative in keeping God's ways. But God would have been a good representative in keeping God's ways. But that's not what they chose.
No.
Yeah. So, you know, they go into civil war, they go into captivity. Now, the book ends with people being forced to worship the foreign gods of the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Whew, that's rough.
I don't know how much they were forced by that point. They just became part of their life.
Acquiesced. Not all, though. I mean...
No, there were some. There was a faithful remnant.
David and Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and, you know, that kind of thing. So, 1st and 2nd Kings were probably written throughout the period of the United Monarchy to the Babylonian exile. Recorded or source documents, however it goes. I'm going to lean towards source documents. There are 2 references in 1 Kings that demonstrate that the book was written over a period of time. 1 Kings 8:8 speak of the existence of the ark and the inner sanctuary to this day. So the ark wasn't there anymore, right, in the inner sanctuary, which would not have been true at the close of 2 Kings. 1 Kings 12:19 states that Israel had been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. Which at the point it was, you know, actually written, that wasn't also true, right? So these passages show that 1st and 2nd Kings were written throughout the period and then finalized after the Babylonian captivity into one document. Right? So it became one compiled document. Since there's no reference to the decree of King Cyrus in Persia that allowed the Hebrews to return to Jerusalem, the final composition was completed prior to 539 BC. Since 2nd King concludes with the release of Jehoiachin, the final form must have been completed shortly after 560 BC. So, yeah, I mean, makes sense, right? It's a captivity book. So the first recipients of 1st and 2nd Kings would have been those people who experienced all of these events. They were probably Israelites, again, the second, or the divided monarchy all the way through the captivity. And that's how you want to read this. You want to read this as a people going, what happened? And all the prophets told us, and now here we are today. The temple's gone, our nation's destroyed.
We need to remember, too, this covers such a long time span. We can't read it as one event happening right after the other.
Yeah, it's not that way. It's a long time span. So the argument for this one is it's the exact same argument, that they've degenerated and they've gone into exile, right? And so the key verse is 2 Kings 17:22-23. And the sons of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. Israel, the northern 10 tribes, right? They did not depart from them until the Lord removed Israel from his sight. As he spoke through all his servants, the prophets, so Israel was carried away into exile from their own land to Assyria until this day.
So they were still in Assyria when this was compiled.
And think about that, like, Israel has had one tragedy after another for so long. And those warring factions, the northern 10 tribes and southern 2 tribes, after they had split, they became totally other.
Oh, yeah.
Because the Assyrians, they didn't set, like, in Babylon, everybody was kind of kept in a general area together. And then there were still some people in into Judah.
Right.
But very few northern 10 tribes or Israeli people were allowed to stay.
Right.
And they were taken to India, to
and totally
Persia,
dispersed.
Yeah, to Spain. To they were
in small groups, so they couldn't get together to rebel or try to return or whatever.
Yeah, the Assyrian captivity was by far the worst one.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the first and second book of Kings. These are great books. Take the time to read them. We're eventually going to get into them and actually tell the stories.
Right.
And read them and talk about the prophets and like these, activity step by step kind of idea. But take these books, read them, and ask yourself the question: what is God trying to teach me? What can I learn from this? What can I take out of this? And then take what you can take out of it and let it soak into you.
Right.
So Christianity has become somewhat impotent in that we say things like, as long as you believe.
Right.
But the Bible's not really built that way.
No.
You have to take action.
Right.
You have to make a choice. To whose name are you going to live your life?
Right.
Are you going to live in God's name and do the things that He asks of you? Are you going to be obedient and live to the glory of the risen King? And Jesus has very specific things He wants.
Right.
If you're a Christian, if you're a Jewish person, well, you got to keep the law, right? And so we've got to let that soak back into us.
As Paul said, faith without works is dead.
That's right. Yeah, and life is apart from works because life is tied up in Jesus.
Right.
But God's desire for us is to work.
Right.
Is to do in His name.
Right.
And these books tell that story.
Right.
I see a lot of Jesus in 1st and 2nd Kings. Right. It only takes a couple readings before you go, oh my gosh, like I do see the God of the New Testament in this. He's there. Because these are the documents that spawned the need for the new covenant and the forever heavenly King. Yep. Because let's do the macro thing right now.
Right.
There was Samuel and God was ruling the nation.
Right.
The people rejected God and they took a king. Now there's Jesus who is from God and showed Himself worthy of being called the Son of God by raising from the dead and conquering death and hell. And now He rules, but the people still choose a king. Right? We got Netanyahu.
Right.
But soon that will end.
Right.
And and God will tabernacle with us again.
Right.
Right? All of His people.
Right.
Everyone who's called from all 4 corners of the world, because Abraham wasn't a Jew.
Right.
So we are the people of faith, and these books are worth your time. Thank you for joining us for Modern Mind Ancient Book. We've enjoyed this.
Yes.
Thank you, Pete, for being here.
Thank you.
And we hope that you have enjoyed it. Again, please like, subscribe, share, talk to people about what you're hearing and what you're learning. And we would love to hear from you. modernmindancientbook@gmail.com. Thank you.